How's it going, everybody? This is Donnell here. Okay, hear me. Okay, so we're going to be speaking on this book here again. Sorry, this one, Boundaries. When to say yes, how to say no to take control of your life. This is going to be starting off at chapter 2. I know it's kind of reverse. I kind of have to figure that out later. But yeah, the music is from Just Instrumentals. I believe it's Just Instrumentals. Just instrumental music. So check that person's page out. This is Eric Santier. Jimmy P number 1. So, and this is the 2-hour extended version. All right, let's start. Chapter 2. What does a boundary look like? The parents of a 25-year-old man came to see me, Henry, with a common request. They wanted me to fix their son, Joshua. When I asked where Joshua was, they answered, "Oh, he didn't want to come." "Why?" I asked. "Well, he doesn't think he has a problem," they replied. "Maybe he's right," I said to their surprise. "Tell me about it." They recited a history of problems that began at a very young age. Joshua had never been quite up to snuff in their eyes. In recent years, he had exhibited problems with drugs and an inability to stay in school and find a career. It was apparent that they loved their son very much and were heartbroken over the way he was living. They had tried everything they knew to get him to change and live a responsible life, but all had failed. He was still using drugs, avoiding responsibility, and keeping questionable company. They told me that they had always given him everything he needed. They supported him financially at the school so he wouldn't have to work, and he would have plenty of time for study and a social life. When he flunked out of one school or stopped going to classes, they were more than happy to do everything they could to get him into another school where it might be better for him. After they had talked for a while, I responded, "I think your son is right. He doesn't have a problem." You could have mistaken their expression for a snapshot. They stared at me in disbelief for a full minute. Finally, the father said, "Did I hear you right? You don't think he has a problem?" "That's correct," I said. "He doesn't have a problem. You do. He can pretty much do whatever he wants, no problem. You pay, you fret, you worry, you plan, you exert energy to keep him going. He doesn't have a problem because you have taken it from him. Those things should be his problem, but as it now stands, they are yours. Would you like for me to help him have some problems?" They looked at me like I was crazy, but some lights were beginning to go on in their heads. "What do you mean, help him to have some problems?" his mother asked. "Well," I explained, "I think that's the solution to this problem will be to clarify some boundaries so that his actions cause him problems, not you." "What do you mean, boundaries?" the father asked. "Look at it this way. It is as if your neighbor, who never waters his lawn, but whenever you turn on your sprinkler system, the water falls on his lawn. Your grass is turning brown and dying, but Joshua looks down at his green grass and thinks to himself, 'My yard is doing fine.' That is how your son's life is. He doesn't study or plan or work, yet he has a nice place to live, plenty of money, and all the rights of a family member who's doing his part. If you would define the property lines a little better, it would fix the sprinkler system so that the water will fall on your lawn, and he didn't water his own lawn. Oh, and if he didn't water his own lawn, he would have to live in dirt. He might not like that after a while. As it stands now, he's irresponsible and happy, and you are responsible and miserable. A little boundary clarification would do the trick. You need some fences to keep his problem out of your yard and in his, where they belong." Isn't that a bit cruel just to stop helping like that? The father asked. Has helping him helped? I asked. His look told me that he was beginning to understand. Invisible property lines and responsibility. In the physical world, boundaries are easy to see. Fences, signs, walls, moats with alligators, manicured lawns, and hedges are all physical boundaries. In their differing appearances, they give the same message. This is where my property begins. The owner of the property is legally responsible for what happens on his or her property, No, non-owners are not responsible for the property. Physical boundaries mark a visible property line that someone holds the deed to. You can go to the country courthouse and find out exactly where those boundaries of responsibility are and whom to call if you have business there. In the spiritual world, boundaries are just as real, but often harder to see. The goal of this chapter is to help you define your intangible boundaries and to recognize them as an ever-present reality that can increase your love and save your life. In reality, these boundaries define your soul and they help you guard it and maintain it. Proverbs 4:23. Me and not me. Boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. If I know where my yard begins and ends, I am free to do with it what I like. Taking responsibility for my life opens up many different options. However, if I do not own my life, my choices and options become very limited. Think how confusing it would be if someone told you to guard this property diligently because I will hold you responsible for what happens here, and then did not tell you the boundaries of the property, or they did not give you the means with which to protect the property. This would not only be confusing, but also potentially dangerous. This is exactly what happens to us emotionally and spiritually, however. God designed a world where we all live within ourselves. That is, we inhabit our own souls, and we're responsible for the things that make up us. Each heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can share in its joy. Proverbs 14:10. We have to deal with what is in our soul, and boundaries help us to define what that is. If we are not shown the parameters or are taught wrong parameters, we are in for much pain. The Bible tells us clearly that what our parameters are and how to protect them. But often, our family and other past relationships confuses us about our parameters. In addition to showing us what we are responsible for, boundaries help us to define what is not on our property and what we are not responsible for. We are not, for example, responsible for other people. Nowhere are we commanded to have other control, although we spend not a lot of time and energy trying to get it. Sorry. Quick note. I guess I don't know. For one, I hope this is under fair use. Second, where he says there's other control, my guess is our brother's keeper in Genesis, where God asked Cain after Cain murdered his brother. He's like, "Where's your brother?" He's like, "Am I my brother's keeper? Am I supposed to be responsible for him?" So, just a thought, but I get it where it's coming from. You know, you shouldn't override or take so much agency from another person in terms of responsibility. You know, because everybody's responsible for their own lives. And if you take more responsibility for another person's life, you remove agency from them and you essentially overburden yourself. Yeah, I don't know. It just kind of popped up. Still a good point. Don't take more than you can chew. Don't bite more than what you can chew. And, be responsible for yourself. Okay, moving on. 2 and 4. We are responsible to others and for ourselves. Carry each other's burdens, says Galatians 6:2. And in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. This verse shows our responsibility to one another. Many times others have burdens that are too big to bear. They do not have enough strength, resources, or knowledge to carry the load, and they need help. Denying ourselves to do for others what they cannot do for themselves is showing the sacrificial love of Christ. This is what Christ did for us. He did what we could not do for ourselves. He saved us. This is being responsible too. On the other hand, Galatians 6:5 says that each one should carry their own load. Everyone has responsibilities that only he or she can carry. These things are our own particular load that we need to take daily responsibility for and work out. No one can do certain things for us. We have to take ownership of certain aspects of life that are our own load. The Greek words for burden and load give us insight into the meanings of these texts. The Greek word for burden means excess burdens. Maybe I should put excess burdens. That'd be actually pretty helpful. Or burdens that are so heavy that they weigh us down. These burdens are like boulders. They can crush us. We shouldn't be expected to carry a boulder by ourselves. It would break our backs. We need help with the boulders, those times of crisis and tragedy in our lives. In contrast, the Greek word for load means cargo and the burden of daily toil. This word describes the everyday things we all need to do. These loads are like knapsacks. Knapsacks are possible to carry. We're expected to carry our own. We're expected to deal with our own feelings, attitudes, and behaviors, as well as the responsibilities God has given to each one of us, even though it takes effort. Problems arise when people act as if their boulders are daily loads and refuse help, or as if their daily loads are boulders and they shouldn't have to carry. The results of these two instances are either perpetual pain or irresponsibility. Lest we stay in pain or become irresponsible, it is very important to determine what me is, where my boundary of responsibility is, and where someone else's begins. We will define what we are responsible for later in this chapter. For now, let's look more closely at the nature of boundaries. Good in, bad out. Boundaries help us to distinguish our property so that we can take care of it. They help us to guard our heart with all diligence. Proverbs 4:23. The North American Standard, Bible, study Bible, something like that. We need to keep things that will nurture us inside our fences and keep things that will harm us outside. In short, boundaries help us keep the good in and the bad out. They guard our treasures, Matthew 6:19-20, so that people will not steal them. They keep the pearls inside and the pigs outside, Matthew 7:6. So I definitely know that one. Don't give to pigs what is precious. Don't give to pearls. Don't give pearls to pigs lest they trample over you. They trample them underfoot and then attack you. So be careful what you give to somebody. Keep the pearls inside and the pigs outside, I guess, but I don't. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna move on. I'm sorry. Sometimes we have bad on the inside and good on the outside. In these instances, we need to be able to open our boundaries and to let the good in and the bad out. In other words, our fences need gates in them. For example, if I find that I have some pain or sin within, I need to open up and communicate it to God and others so that I can be healed. Confessing pain and sin helps get it out so that it does not continue to poison me on the inside. James, 1 John 1:9, James 5:16, Mark 7:21-23. I'm like, sorry, just a small criticism. Why not have when it suggests Jesus is the gate? I haven't read fully through this, so I'm just commenting along the way. But if he's the gate, and then if robbers go outside from other means, then it shows that somebody's violating boundaries. The boundary of God, or essentially the boundaries of religion. If Jesus is the gate to God, and other people, violate this gate by going to other means, isn't that a violation of boundaries? A violation from getting to God? All right, I'm gonna continue going. And when the good is on the outside, we need to open our gates and let it in. Jesus speaks on this phenomenon in receiving him and his truth. Revelations 3:20, John 1:12. Other people have good things to give us, and we need to open wide our hearts to them. 2 Corinthians 6:11-13. Often we will close our boundaries to good things from others, staying in a state of deprivation. In short, boundaries are not walls. The Bible does not say that we are to be walled off from others. In fact, it says we are to be one with them. We are to be in community with them, but in every community, all members have their own space and property. I'm like, this isn't making sense. The important thing is that, so from what I'm getting so far, I'm sorry, because when I'm reading this, I'm like remembering like verses that like pop up into my head. So it's like, I'm sorry if you thought if this was supposed to be like audio reading. I'm gonna have to edit the title, but it made me think like there's this. It's not a paradox. It's more so kind of like a not a one or the other, but a both kind of thing. So within the hedge of protection, you have the things that you hold dear and things that you have to protect and things you have to take care of. Then you have the wider exterior in which people have some form of entry. So so when people try to go into the inner boundary of, like, let's say is this patch represents who you are yourself, you have the responsibility, the duty to allow them in or out, and that'll depend on the person. But essentially having boundaries and suggesting that if they go past it, you push them back and say, no, don't go past this boundary. I have set you outside of the boundary for good reason. And so you have certain people who move in the boundary, in the inner circle, because you have allowed them to. And these will be select people. And then there will be people that you keep out because they won't honor that. So you set up this hedge of protection for yourself to suggest internally, do not do this. This is something I am not comfortable with. But I don't know, the scriptures that I'm reading, and I'd have to read them over again, but they seem to be like a stretch. That's my first impression on it. Seems to be a stretch in its use. Like for instance, the scripture that says like receiving things or being open to like if your heart is hardened and you have walls, then they say you shouldn't keep walls from people. But I'm like, that's the hardened heart, and isn't that the aspect of Christ where he calls a person to hey, give me your heart of heart and I'll give you a heart of stone. So it's like God who's encouraging mankind to have a heart of flesh. He's like, hey, give me a heart of flesh and I'll give you the heart. Give me your heart of stone, I'll give you a heart of flesh. So I'll soften your heart, or I'll give you a new heart that's not hard, that's not like defensive. And so it's strange to me from reading this, because it's like it's telling you one thing and then it's telling you another. And I'm like, I know the Bible has spoken. I don't know if it's better. I don't even know if it's spoken explicitly, like, because the way I see it, maybe the audience didn't need to hear it, hear about certain things. But I don't know. I'm a critic, so not like a professional critic, but I just have a critic's heart. So let me continue on. The important thing is that property lines are permeable enough to allow passing and strong enough to keep out of danger. Often when people are abused while growing up, they reverse the function of boundaries and keep the bad in and the good out. When Mary was growing up, she suffered abuse from her father. She was not encouraged to develop good boundaries. Sorry about that. As a result, she would close herself off, holding the pain inside. She would not open up to express her hurt. and get it out of her soul. She would not open up to let support from the outside in to heal outside in to heal her. In addition, she would continuously allow others to dump more pain into her soul. Consequently, when she came in for help, she was carrying a lot of pain, was still being abused, and was walled off from support from the outside. She had to reverse the ways her boundaries work. She needed fences that were strong enough to keep the bad out, and gates in those fences to let out the bad already in her soul and let out the good she desperately needed. So that's interesting. So it shows that pain kind of, and I think sin really does that, like for a lot of things. It kind of reverses things, reverses this proper intention. So given that, I mean, you've heard it, I read it, you heard it, person who's been in pain, they hold on to their hurt, and then they keep good things out and people who want to help them out. And for those who are, I guess, devious, maybe harmful, it's almost like they allow them in and subsequently allow them in while they push good people out, in fear that they're bad people, but bad people are good at what they do. So they eventually, some of them slip through and some of them are revealed to be bad people when they're in. But I'll keep reading because even though it seems weird, it's just like with the Bible, it should answer itself. God and boundaries. The concept of boundaries come from the very nature of God. God defines himself as a distinct, separate being, and he's responsible for himself. He defines and takes responsibility for his personality by telling us what he thinks, feels, plans, allows, and will not allow, likes and dislikes. He also defines himself as separate from his creation and from us. He differentiates himself from others. He tells us who he is and who he is not. For example, he says he is love and that he is not darkness. 1 John 4:16, 1 through 6. 1 John 4:16, 1 John 1 and verse 6. In addition, he has boundaries within the Trinity. The Father, the Son, and the Spirit are one, but at the same time, there are distinct persons within their own boundaries. Each person has his own personhood and responsibilities, as well as the connection with and love for one another. John 17:24. God also limits what he will allow in his yard. He confronts sin and allows consequences for behavior. He guards his house and will not allow evil things to go there. He invites people in who will love him and lets his love flow outward to them at the same time. The gates of his boundaries open and close appropriately. And the same way he gave us his likeness, Genesis 1:26, he gave us personal responsibility within limits. He wants us to rule over the earth and to be responsible stewards over the life he has given us. To do that, we need to develop boundaries like God's. Examples of boundaries. Boundaries are anything that helps to differentiate you from someone else, or shows where you begin and end. Here are some examples of boundaries. Skin. The most basic boundary that defines you is your physical skin. People often use this boundary as a metaphor for saying that their personal boundary has been violated. He really gets under my skin. Your physical self is the first way that you learn that you are separate from others. As an infant, you slowly learn that you are different from the mother and father who cuddles you. The skin boundary keeps the good in and the bad out. It protects your blood and bones, holding them on the inside and all together. It also keeps germs outside, protecting you from infection. At the same time, skin has openings that let the good, like food, in and the bad, like waste products, out. Victims of physical and sexual abuse often have a poor sense of boundaries. Early in life, they were taught that property did not really begin at their skin. Others could invade their property and do whatever they wanted. As a result, they have a difficulty establishing boundaries later in life. In the physical world, words. In the physical world, A fence or some other kind of structure usually delineates a boundary. In the spiritual world, fences are invisible. Nevertheless, you can create a good protective fences with your words. The most basic boundary setting word is no. It lets others know that you exist from them and that you are in control of you. Being clear about your no and your yes is a theme that runs throughout the Bible. Matthew 5:37, James 5:12. No is a confrontational word. The Bible says that we are to confront people we love, saying, no, that behavior is not okay. I will not participate in that. The word no is also important in setting limits on abuse. Many passages of scripture urge us to say no to others' sinful treatment of us. Matthew 19:15-20. The Bible warns us against giving to others reluctantly or under compulsion. 2 Corinthians 9:7. People with poor boundaries struggle with saying no to the control, pressure, demands, and sometimes the real needs of others. They feel that if they say no to someone, they will endanger their relationship with that person. So they passively comply with inward resent. Sometimes a person's pressuring you to do something. Other times the pressure comes from your own sense of what you should do. If you cannot say no to this external or internal pressure, you have lost control of your property and are not enjoying the fruit of self-control. Your words also define your property for others as you communicate your feelings, intentions, or dislikes. It is difficult for people to know where you stand and when you do not use words to define your property. God does this when he says, I like this and I hate that. Or I will do this and I will not do that. Your words let people know where you stand and thus give them a sense of the edges that help define you. I don't like it when you yell at me. Gives people a clear message of how you conduct relationships and lets them know the rules of your yard. Knowing the truth about God and his property puts limits on you and shows you his boundaries. Truth. Knowing the truth about God and his property puts limits on you and shows you his boundaries. Realizing the truth of his unchangeable reality helps you to define yourself in relation to him. When he says that you will reap what you sow. Galatians 6:7. For example, you either define yourself in relation to that reality or continue to get injured if you try to go against it. To be in touch with God's truth is to be in touch with reality, and to live in accord with that reality makes for a better life. Psalm 119:2 and Psalm 119:45. Satan is the great distorter of reality. Recall in the garden when he was tempted to Recall in the garden when he tempted Eve to question God's boundaries and his truth. The consequences were disastrous. There is always safety in the truth, whether it be knowing God's truth or knowing the truth about yourself. Many people live scattered and tumultuous lives trying to live outside their own boundaries, not accepting or expressing the truth of who they are. Honesty about who you are gives you the biblical value of integrity or oneness. Geographical distance. Proverbs 22:3 says that the prudent see danger and take refuge. Sometimes physically removing yourself from a situation will help maintain boundaries. You can do this to replenish yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually after you have given to your limit, as Jesus often did. Or you can remove yourself to get away from danger and put limits on evil. The Bible urges us to separate from those who continue to hurt us and to create a safe space for ourselves. Removing yourself from this situation will also cause the one who is left behind to experience a loss of fellowship that may lead to change behavior. Matthew 18:17-18, 1 Corinthians 5:11-13. When a relationship is abusive, many times The only way to finally show the other person that your boundaries are real is to create space until they're ready to deal with the problem. The Bible supports the idea of limiting togetherness for the sake of binding evil. All right, that's it for right now. We reached our 30 mark. On page 39, the next theme within chapter 2 will be, in terms of these boundaries, will be time. So, hopefully we get back to it. And that's it for today. All right, you all take care. Hopefully my yammering wasn't too much. All right, bye-bye. And that's just instrumental music with Jimmy P #1, Eric Satie. Bye.